After sorting out our half-price Holley accessory drive last time, thanks to a lot of research and stubbornness, today there's a few more items on the agenda that also need to fit up here, each with its own series of complications, but how hard can it possibly be?
Doesn't it just look so much? So, oh no! I want it before back. Put it back to before.
There are times when I honestly hesitate to admit we're still not done yet, though I think you and I both would agree. The build is a huge part of the fun of these projects, and as we are practically building an entire car from scratch at this point and have never done anything remotely like that before, it's sure been fun. Anyway, if you're new, you should really check out the previous episodes. But first, we've been told all our lives not to judge a book by its cover, and I've come to find this also applies to cars. As although it may look relatively roomy up here, in actuality the cover, hood, bonnet, whatever, closes things in a lot. So, as you do in spaces at a premium, we're working from large to small, with two of the largest remaining items being a radiator and AC condenser. So let's start with them. I've gone back and forth quite a bit on how to package these things. Originally, I thought we'd lean them forward on the underside of the frame rails, and I even mentioned that in episode 15. 12 episodes later though, and thinking about it again, the aggressive angle does make me a bit concerned about creating front-end lift at speed, and I'm not too sure how we'd plumb the lines. So let's modify our search criteria a bit for some slightly narrower units that will fit inside the frame, at which point we can choose any angle we like. Ow. Okay, here's what we've come up with. This is a radiator from a '67 Mustang. Because of course. And this is a universal AC condenser that's hopefully the right size. And would you just look at them? That's what I call totally rad. Sorry. You may have noticed the Radiator has end tanks in the north to south direction, while the condenser has them east to west. And though I may only have something like 28 vision, this was actually intentional to allow for convenient routing of the hoses. Additionally, we chose this rad because it's dual core, which means it should function well. Fully aluminum, which also means it should function well, but moreover means it's modifiable. And lastly, the outlets are just a 1/4 inch larger than our water pump, so the hoses... they're larger? Okay, so the hoses may not necessarily be a direct fit after all, unless we can find some that take up the difference, but a couple of these little guys are a good fallback. Or we could cut off the necks and weld on some new ones that are actually the right size. Let's figure this out later. Right now, the condenser seems to fit nicely, but the rad's mounting brackets definitely need tweaking. Therefore, Mr. Blackhurst, I suggest you look away now. Measuring and marking up is followed by some relief cuts, and the welds get mostly sliced through with a grinder before we can switch to a Dremel for more precision. I think that went through. Gotta be honest, wasn't expecting the hacksaw with a steel blade, but I mean, you use the tools you got, and we really shouldn't cut into the core. That would be bad. Thankfully, only a slight groove is needed, as the beauty of metal fatigue lets us just snap it off, so fine. The other side gets the same treatment, and we're leaving the remainder of the brackets in place as they could come in handy.
That's right.
Good. Now, what angle should it be? There's three possibilities. Backwards, forwards, or we could just leave it straight up and down. But unfortunately, aerodynamics are going to come into play here in a big way, and even though I'm wearing my glasses, I'm not exactly an expert on that. I do have Google though, and a will to use it. So here we go. Most often you'll see radiators sitting straight up and down, which makes total sense. The fins are square to the face, so positioning the rad like this lets air flow through it as freely as possible. In a modern crossover or truck that has a hood as high or higher than Mr. Snoop himself, this is not an issue, of course. You can just slap a large unit in there with room to spare. But as I've said already, our hood is low. And if we stand this Mustang unit straight up, we're going to have problems with ground clearance. Obviously, you could say, well, you bought the wrong radiator, you idiot. But here's the thing. We've got a V8 to keep cool, and I really don't want to deal with overheating issues later. So that's that then. The good news is we can actually benefit from angling the radiator in two ways. First, we might just be able to make it fit. And second, a large surface area creates a lot of drag. But by leaning it on an angle, you effectively reduced that frontal area while keeping the same amount of cooling potential. So then, how does backwards look? Well, it naturally directs air under the car, which could create some downforce if we build a smooth underbelly. But we don't have much room to lean back before interfering with our accessory drive, hanging too low, or sticking out the grill like a tongue, which ain't our style. I'm also not too sure if the engine's air intake would have room to pass over the top. That one better work. If we tilt it forward, just not as aggressively as I was originally thinking, we can take advantage of the shape of the hood to tuck it in as high and close as possible, while keeping the lower end close to the tires to maximize ground clearance, approach angle, and hopefully keep the plumbing simple. Furthermore, ducting will take the small-ish opening of the grille and smoothly blend it into the face of the cooler, with a spoiler-like fin even possible to help aid downforce and further control of the air. We still need to be cautious about clearance to other components, and there may be a degree of lift if there's nowhere for the pressure to escape, but we're going to leave that one open for debate. Plus, seeing as the Mark 1 and 2 GT6s had hood louvers from the factory, what do you think about us adding some here? It would help airflow and could look pretty cool. Let us know. Regardless, I think we found our winner. In fact, it has to be. We've got what appears to be pretty clean paths for hose routing, clearance for an intake, and as much ground clearance as we're going to get away with, so it's close enough to keep moving. All of this needs permanent mounting, and you'd be forgiven for thinking that's our next step, because it would be logical. But as I said at the beginning of this video, there's a few major items on the agenda today, and while we're off to a decent start, the next two also need to live around here. So let's not get hasty. What we need now is a crash bar. Here's the deal. This car has no airbags, no seatbelt tensioners, no ABS, no traction control, and it's small enough that we really should paint it bright neon yellow and stick a dune flag off the back of it. The idea then is not to crash it. But then they wouldn't be called accidents, would they? We're making a conscious effort to try to improve everything we touch in this project. And from factory, the crash structure was a C-channel member made from very thin steel, which, in my opinion, qualified it as pretty useless. It also sat a few inches below the bumper, putting it far beneath modern traffic, even before we lowered the car another inch. So the good news here is at least we'll have to try pretty hard to make something worse. We started to address the issue in episode 15 by constructing the front of our new frame with a kick-up, expressly so that our crash bar will be in line with the bumper, which is as high as we can go. It's similar to the factory design, and in theory it should also allow the frame to fold up, preventing the car from submarining, and hopefully absorb part of the impact at the same time. To construct the actual bar itself though, we've decided to follow a modern approach with these beefy aluminum boxes. They're 125 wall, 1.5" square tubing, and once welded together it'll be a far more comparable package to what automakers now use, while still being lightweight and certainly far more substantial than the original design. You'll notice the front of the frame rails are currently cut on an angle though, and this was our previous line of thought, except we've changed our minds, so now they need squaring off. Unfortunately, before we can get to that, there's one last elephant in the room, and it's a big one. Conceptually. Ever since I first laid eyes on the Mark III GT6, I knew it was a pretty little car. That pretty and little. And pretty little. Great proportions, with just enough curves and creases to keep things defined. But with the removal of some pinch seams, new 15-inch wheels, a wider track width, and reduced ride height, I think this one's even more gorgeouser than ever. Maybe that's just like a mother telling her child he's handsome, though. The fact is, nothing in this world can ever be truly great unless it has a major flaw. And in our case, it's those massive, hideous, ugly, and did I say hideous black plastic overriders that sadly serve a purpose. If you didn't know, the fenders on these cars are also the hood, and the entire thing tips forward like an E-type. It's really handy and an extremely unique design cue, but in order for it to clear the doors, bumper, and everything else on the way up, the hinge points had to be way out here, and we don't like them at all. So, what do you do when you don't like something? No, not again. Listen, I know it's feeling like we can't get rolling on anything today, and I apologize for that, but just know this is the edited version. So if it's hard to follow, just imagine what we've been going through. Yes, we are going to cut the factory hinges off, but in their place we have to put something, and that's where these parts from a BMW 5 Series come into play. 5 Series sounds random to you? Understandable. This guy's already done it though, so it should work in theory. Right? They're a very cool multi-link design, and on the Beamer they open the hood in the traditional manner. However, by flipping them around, we should get the forward and up motion we need, and we're thinking they'll mount somewhere about here, which appears to be safely behind the cut line on the frame rails, so good. Let's get back to that. All right, actual physical progress. Finally. Nice. The next step is to correct a minor height issue. We thought we'd just use one of these tubes originally. But we changed our minds again, didn't we? And that means the frame rails now taper down too much at the front, so out comes a fresh chunk of grinder fodder, and after some planning and measuring with a CAD template, we can get back to work.
That fits in there like that, squares off the front, and we should be pretty much 3 inches, which I think we are. So that's perfect.
Yeah. Good job.
Okie dokie, with it cleaned up and held in place with some magnets, you can see the fitment better. It's not perfect, I'll grant you, but we're ultimately more concerned about the finished dimensions, and any gaps here are definitely within range of a MIG welder. The edges have already been chamfered for welding too, so one for the other side can come next. And I'm really glad we're doing this, because although we're effectively just undoing something that's already been doed, I think it'll be worth it in a worst case scenario. Just hope that we never find out, please. Things are measuring an even 3 inches square now, so time to add some end caps. A piece of 3/16 stock is perfect for the task, and yes, you super keen-eyed folk, that piece is from when we built our starter bracket. Good eye. There's no wasting material around here. After checking the fitment, a series of holes are planned out and drilled to size, with the 3 in the middle allowing for plug welds to that bar later. Countersinking them helps to make sure that we actually get a complete weld, which is kind of important. Before we go fusing it all together though, we don't actually need the entire middle layer left behind, as this is technically our crumple zone. So the brunt of it is chopped out, leaving just a small section at the front, and the remainder of the old bend can be pulled down straight so the new piece will line up perfectly. ×2, please. A very quick side note to those wondering. We do occasionally rotate the tires to reduce severe flat spotting from the stands. Probably could do it more often though. Now, I might have alluded to this with the hinges earlier, but we've got a series of components that will need attaching to the frame rails in due course. So before we lose the perfect opportunity, let's get some holes drilled and begin the production of a few captive nut plates. Good stuff. I'm already getting used to the new look, and the rest of the welds will get finished up later along with a few others on a seemingly never-ending list. Why not do it now? It's just going to be way easier with the body off and the frame repositionable. That's really all it is. Anyway, the end plates need welding next, but first, in order for the crash bar to attach to them, we're going to need a few more holes. Small ones going right the way through are made first to keep everything lined up, and they're quickly followed by a hole saw on just one side to allow access for the bolts later. May I say that so far, aluminum is so much nicer to work with than all that 1/8 1/4 inch steel we've used previously.
So we've got those two pieces, got the hole saws through there, we got our little bolts, bolting plates attached. These are not welded together yet, they will be ultimately, but for now we've just sort of butted up the ends and everything, and that's where it's going to live. And now we can take that, hold it up there, and that's what it's going to look like. Now, where we tacked these on, I did it sort of on the face, and I ended up getting a little bit of a bump, so I just need to flap those down, because right now these, it rocks a bit too much. But we're just going to clean those up, hold this where it needs to be, center it side to side, and we can tack those plates on, and then these bars here will have helped to hold them perfectly in line with each other. How's it look?
Looks great.
Good. Let's make it permanent. Right there, now weld it!
With that last bit of grinding taken care of, some tape and an F-clamp can hold the bar in place for a series of tacks, and there she is on her own. The wooden dowel was just to make sure the frame rails didn't move during welding, in case you're wondering, but we'll leave it in place for now since there are so many tacks in place still. Kinda looking a bit Mad Max-ish, don't you think? I mean, cool, but not our goal. So our last step is to add a bend to each side so the finished bar will sit completely behind the nose, as demonstrated by this CAD template. Therefore, some hard to see lines are scribed out with the use of an angle finder, and we can get to work with the cutting disc. Note the new patent pending Invisiware dust mask, protecting my lungs from all that lovely aluminum powder. There's also a fan going. Don't do this, kids.
So we've cut these slits, we've beveled the edges a little bit, or chamfered the edges a little bit, so that when we weld it back up, it can have a little bit more surface area, and we can also flap it flat again, because at least the ones in the middle here have to mate up flush, so we need to at least flap them down. But I'd also like to clean the top and the bottom so that it's nice and smooth, and we'll just leave the weld be visible on the back side here. But we've done this side and that side, bolted it back up, everything seems to line up very nicely. So I'm just going to lean into this. Don't think I'm going to have to give it much effort. More than you think, actually, sir. Just like that. That looks pretty snazzy.
Yeah, I think that does.
And because we clamped them together there, they hopefully both bent at the same rate and didn't sort of go askew.
Weird angles.
Great, that finishes off the crash bar for now, and though we are planning on some side braces, we'll wait to add them until we're sure they'll clear future components. Plus, seeing as I've never TIGged aluminum before, I better get some practice. You could say a slightly more pressing need right now, though, is to sort that out. Yeah. That is a bit of a panel gap. The new hinges actually sit the exact same width apart as the old ones, which serves no purpose but is kind of ironic. However, with the crash bar now in the way, we're definitely not closing anymore, so there's really only one thing left to do.
I have wanted to hack these things off for 7 years. Today's the day.
Yeehaw.
Normally, this is the part where you'd say, oops.
Thing 1 and thing 2. This is before, right? This is after. I like after.
Doesn't it just look
so much? My mind.
So, oh no! I wanted it before back. Put it back to before.
Yeah, that's right.
It's still sitting up too high. We need to do a little more trimming, but that's much closer.
What do you want to do with these? You said you could sell them for $100 each?
Yeah.
Yeah.
No, actually, we got a better idea.
Better idea? Follow me.
Much better idea.
Before we even started down this whole wormhole of a Restomod / Pro Touring build thing, we knew we wanted to do something with the hinges. And as a result, we never actually welded this panel in place, which turned out to be a smart move. It does happen occasionally. You see, currently, the new hinges are wider than the gap in the hood, and they also need to sit up into the hood a bit, so a couple of careful trims on either side are needed to open it up. Excellent. Now, the final push. Somehow, we need to attach these BMW hinges to a hood they were never intended to fit, while putting them in an orientation they were never intended to operate in. The one side is already mounted here with some wooden shims, and we've done enough plotting that makes us believe the path of the hood should work for our needs. But to actually make the connection happen, we're going to start off by creating what we'll call a torsion bar. 2 pieces of steel box connected by 1-inch DOM tubing will tie both sides together, give us a frame to build out to, and should help the hood open evenly, something the factory hinges could not claim. The new BMW units have already been re-drilled to the same 8 cm spacing on both sides, so the steel boxes will need some corresponding holes as well. But first, with that final grinding done, here's how it's all gonna fit and work together.
That'll work quite nicely, I think.
Yeah, awesome. And it'll even clear the bumper, right? Right? It'll even clear the bumper, right? I'm getting the feeling it's not gonna clear the bumper. Great. Thanks for watching. We have some minor problems to sort out next time. Like, it's not going to work. But I promise you we will get it working and it'll be awesome. So make sure you subscribe and hit the bell so you won't miss anything. Huge thanks as always to our patrons and donators who help ease the burden of the YouTube algorithm. And if you'd like to help out as well, there are links in the description below. Stay safe, and we'll catch you next time.